Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here. My name is Liz Coleman. I'm the chair for AAM's Committee on Audience Research and Evaluation. We're a professional network under AAM that supports museum professionals who are interested in or are doing audience research and evaluation in their museums. And we really consider ourselves a support group for you all and a support system for you as you consider how to include research and evaluation in your work. And so because of that, we're trying to create a number of resources or a number of ways to learn information from us. This is the first of our, what we like to call Therapy webinars. We're hoping to have more of these happening more frequently. This is actually a session that we did at AAM this past year that we wanted to share more broadly with all of you. But in the future, we're going to be bringing in a lot of new topics, as well as hopefully having just some drop-in sessions where people can come and ask some of us who are members of CARE their questions about audience research and evaluation. So I want to thank Erica Kavam and Sarah Cohn, who are our chairs for Therapy and will be kind of guiding us through this process for at least the next year. And thank you again so much for joining us. With that, I'm again going to remind everyone to mute yourself if you're not speaking. There will hopefully be time for questions at the end. As Erica said, put your questions in the chat box, and then we can also hopefully have more of a discussion at that point as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Gray.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, hang on. We're both working it.
Emily, you should have control. Let me know if you don't. And you're muted.
Oh. Can you hear me now? Excellent. Okay, my name is Emily Craig. I oversee the Docent Council and manage the school tours program at LACMA. Prior to joining LACMA, I was a research associate at Randy Korn and Associates and the Institute for Learning Innovation. And I'm going to kick us off with some very basic tips that are helpful for everyone, but especially if evaluation is one of the other duties as assigned in your job. So I'm going to focus on 3 areas: planning for use, so tips for before you even get started that will make sharing data back to audiences easier, thinking about who your audience is, so thinking about that when you're planning a presentation or to share data, and then how you present information, so tools and tips for actually pulling things together. So we will dive in first with planning for use. All right, Liz, even though I am controlling your screen, it does, there we go. There we go. All right, sorry about that. So we want to start by setting you up for success. And preparing to share the data actually starts before you have data. So before you begin, you want to think about what you want to know and why it is important. Also, it's really important to make sure you actually have the power to make changes to the things that you're asking about. I know we do a lot of evaluation in our docent program, and they have a lot of opinions, and some of them we actually have control to make changes, and some of them we don't. And even though they like to share those opinions with us, we don't write specific questions about things that we know we can't change. We all know they want to start school tours earlier, but we don't have the budget to get them in the museum before it opens to the public, so we don't ask them about that. Also, when you are working on that presentation, you can keep in mind that initial planning and use that to tie the presentation points together. So we asked this question, we learned whatever we learned, and we've made the following recommendation. Moving ahead to thinking about your audience. Obviously, you don't want to put yourself in the position of writing multiple reports, but think about designing a presentation or tailoring information specifically to the audience that you are addressing. So be able to highlight things that are relevant to the group of people you're sharing something with. Also, I would recommend starting off by keeping it very simple and adding more information in. I have learned that once people start to sort of glaze over and you're giving them too much information or too many numbers or showing them too many charts, it's very challenging to say, let's step back and look at this from a bit further away. But if you start with the basic information and layer things in as people feel comfortable, you'll set yourself up for a more robust conversation and for people to understand a little bit more about what you're talking about. Also, I have learned, especially since I have moved into just, internally within a museum, sharing a report or information in advance can be really helpful because it gives people the chance to think about or share questions with you so that when you're talking to them about a report, you can make sure you are addressing those points or questions. And even if they don't share questions or thoughts with you before a presentation or before a conversation, at least they might have taken a look at the report or other information, and they'll be familiar with what you are sharing. So it won't be a whole barrage of brand new information. So now we will move on to the most important part, the tools of the trade. So things you can use to pull it all together. I know you might not have access to fancy statistical software, but a lot of things that come with your basic Office suite can be very helpful to you. I use Excel and Word, as well as a number of Google products to collect information and analyze information, as well as to design it for presentation. So Excel is pretty much what we use here at LACMA across the board in terms of databases. So the example I have on the screen right now is data we collected in the European galleries at LACMA, and we just created a massive spreadsheet and recorded various activities happening in front of specific works of art that we had identified. And it was just all in Excel. You might have noticed in Excel, there's features like auto sum that does more than just summations for you. If you click on the little arrow next to auto sum, it will give you a whole host of different statistical, you can determine median or average, things, minimum and maximum, things like that. Word, my slides decided I had talked long enough about that. Word can also be helpful. These are tables and charts that I created in Word to showcase some data. Again, you can insert charts in Word, and they have a whole host of different options available for you, and it pops up and you populate the information there. And it spits out the lovely chart for you. We also use Google Forms, and sometimes here at LACMA we use that holistically. So we'll use it to collect the data as well as to do basic visualizations. Google creates these lovely pie charts for you, but sometimes also we'll ask questions of visitors on paper, and then we'll create a Google form on the back end and just enter the data that way. Sometimes if we have a lot of different people entering data, it's easier if we're all following the same format of questions than making sure everybody's entering things in the right boxes in Excel, since sometimes these spreadsheets can get really big. Finally, a couple of hints. I know it can be overwhelming to look at data, so when you're analyzing data, I encourage you to arrange things in ways that make sense to you. So this is another example from some of our data collection in our galleries, and we have found that in order to keep people, sort of focused and keep everything looking nice, it's helpful to group and to color code so that we know everything that's part of Gallery 319 is this dark blue, everything that's part of Gallery 320 is this purple, and so when we're looking across a giant spreadsheet, we can see how things are tied together that way. My colleagues ask me a lot about open-ended data. Your planning helps. What do you want to know? Why is it important? And what can you change? Those are great questions to keep in mind when you're looking at coding open-ended data. You're obviously going to want to break things down into categories, but make sure you don't end up with too many categories. Say you have 30 answers to a question, having 15 different codes that only have 2 answers in them each, or having more than that isn't going to give you a meaningful way to look at the data. At that point, someone should just read through all 30 responses. So, you need to find a balance there. Also, people say crazy things, so don't be afraid to create a category that is just, this is someone who said something that's completely off the reservation, or out in left field. Those miscellaneous categories can be very helpful for you. And then when presenting information to people, I have found that it's helpful to make things visual. So I like to highlight, use a different color to highlight keywords or key points. Not only does it make it easier for people to focus on what you feel is the most important thing, but also if they're scanning through a document, that different color is going to stand out to them. So they will look at those things that you are guiding them to. And then also ask others in your institutions, use your resources. Are there templates that you use to share information on a regular basis internally? Use that as a starting point. You want things to feel comfortable. You don't want someone to open a document or something and feel overwhelmed by it. So use those resources. Don't reinvent the wheel. Also, if you have standardized questions, I would encourage you to do that. I know we have an audience research study here at LACMA, and we use those demographic questions across all of our instruments so that we can compare data from different audiences. So that is all I have, and now I will pass it back to Liz Coleman to talk about work at the Museum of Science Boston.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to keep us going. So my name, as I said earlier, is Liz Coleman. I'm the manager for research and evaluation at the Museum of Science in Boston. And what I am going to talk to you all about is, once you have the data, some ways about thinking about how to analyze and visualize that data to help have conversations about it and use it within your museum. So I'm hoping to give you some tips about what you should be thinking about. And the way I've done that is to kind of think of it in terms of 3 different questions that you should be considering as you are kind of thinking about your data and trying to decide how you should analyze it and how you should visualize it. The first thing that I think about, and that I think you all should be thinking about as well, is what kinds of data do you have? So is the data open-ended? Is it qualitative? Or is it closed-ended and quantitative? That's going to impact how you both analyze and visualize your data. The same thing is true with the questions that you're trying to help the team answer. So you want to think about, how is the team hoping to use the data, or what kinds of changes and actions are they trying to make with the data that you've collected with them. And finally, you want to think about, who are you sharing the data with? So are you going to be talking to educators? Are you going to be talking to museum leadership, the museum field? All of those, the answers to all these questions are going to impact the way that you think about how to analyze and visualize the data. So to illustrate this point, I'm going to hopefully pretty quickly take you through 3 case studies, each one of which is focusing on one of these questions. So the first project that I want to talk to you about is the Building with Biology project. As a part of this project, we conducted a summative evaluation to understand the impacts of an event about synthetic biology on visitors. For data collection, we asked museum professionals around the US to gather surveys from adults who attended the events. And one of the areas that we collected data about as a part of this project was what visitors learned. And that is an example that I'm going to kind of take you through to show you how the kinds of data you're collecting might impact the way you do analysis and do visualizations. So to understand what visitors learned through their participation in the event, we collected data in 2 ways on the survey. First off, we asked an open-ended qualitative question to get visitors' unprompted thoughts about what they learned. And then we also asked a close-ended quantitative rating question to understand the extent to which visitors felt they learned about different topic areas. Once we had the data back, The open-ended responses from that question about what, if anything, did you learn from participating from the event gave us a lot of rich information. And you can see some example quotes on the screen. So the types of things that people told us they learned was details about DNA, the basis of synthetic biology, that there are many practical applications of synthetic biology, or that they learned how important science is to our country. But we had to take all of these responses that we received back, and it was, you can see at the top, about 400, and make some sense out of those. So as kind of Emily was talking about, what we did was we coded all of the responses that we received into different categories based on what the themes we were seeing within our data. And this helped us to understand if there were particular areas that were common or brought up a lot among visitors across all of the different events that we had collected the data from. So each of these quotes actually represents a different theme that we saw in our data. And the codes that those matched up to were kind of just generally learning about science and technology, learning about applications of science, and learning about the significance of science. And by coding and then looking at the proportion of participants who kind of fit into these different categories, coding categories that we created, we could really kind of understand, okay, how common is it that this is coming out in terms of what people are learning during the events. And you can see in this case that, you know, far and away, most of our visitors, a large proportion of them said that they learned about science and technology through the event. But, you know, with our rating questions like this, we could not do exactly the same kind of graph or even do exactly the same kind of analysis because the data were so different. These data were analyzed to see if each person had a higher, lower, or the same rating in their before or after responses. So we kind of took their before responses. If it was nothing, you know, that's, and then we looked at their after, and maybe that one moved up to some. So then we would do like 2 minus 1 or 3 minus 1 to kind of figure out, do they change or not, and kind of figure out, do they stay the same? Is it negatively impacted? Do they feel like they know less, which hopefully is not happening, or are they learning more? So based on this analysis, we created a graph that allowed us to see the proportion of our visitors that fit into each of those categories of either no change, negative change, or positive change. And you can see again in this case that for most of our visitors, they said that they did learn more, know more about facts about synthetic biology after the project, as well as what other people think about synthetic biology. So these were kind of two different, slightly different types of data. One was open-ended and not prompted. One was closed-ended and a rating scale. So they gave us kind of slightly different viewpoints on the learning that people were having at these events. A second consideration that you should be thinking about as you have your data is what are the questions that the team is trying to answer with the data? What are they trying to learn? And to illustrate that, I'm going to share quickly some data from the Let's Do Chemistry project. As a part of this project, we conducted research to understand the content format and facilitation strategies that were included in hands-on activities that helped increase visitors' interest in understandings of the relevance of and feelings of self-efficacy in regards to chemistry. So as a part of this project, we used the same analysis about facilitation to answer different questions that the team had. So these are kind of our methods. We collected 44 videos. The important thing to know here is that we coded the videos in terms of what the facilitators said into one of 3 big predetermined buckets. The first bucket was invite participation. These are things that the facilitator said to initiate visitor engagement or participation in the activity. The second bucket was support exploration. These techniques maintain visitor engagement and moving through the activity. And the third bucket was deepening understanding. These techniques were meant to encourage and support visitor meaning making during the activity. So the first question that we were trying to understand as we coded those videos was just how often generally do these different facilitation techniques happen in any experience that a visitor will have. So what we did was we We calculated the average percentage of utterances in each of the 3 categories. And this is what we found. We just created a simple visual in this case that listed the percentage of utterances that fell into each facilitation technique. But the team still had other questions about the data. And that is what I'm going to show you next. Excuse me. So the second question that the team had was when during the activity, I'm sorry guys, give me 1 second. I'm getting over a cold and my voice is going. When during the activity do the different facilitation techniques occur? To understand this question, we created a graphic that represented all of our codes. So you can see that each column here represents one of the 44 videos. Each row represents one facilitator turn of phrase. The top row is the first thing the facilitator said, and the bottom row is the last thing that they said. So you can see that this is totally showing the data in a completely different way and helped us understand when the different techniques were happening. The final case is about the collaboration for ongoing visitor experiences study. This is a group of 28 science museums from around the US and Canada. They are collecting the same data in the same way from visitor exit surveys to understand who our visitors are, why they visit, and a number of other things. And I think what's interesting about this data is that it helps us to understand it's data that we can use institutionally for our own individual museums as well as a museum field. So this slide shows some data from the Museum of Science in fiscal year 2018. So one of the questions that we had as a museum was how often do visitors come? To answer this question, we used a closed-ended question that asked visitors to indicate the last time they had been to the museum. And then we analyzed these data just with a really easy bar chart, what you see, like you see here, to understand how often visitors were coming to our museum. This was important institutionally, but potentially for something like the museum field, you might want to know how visitor experiences differ if you're a first-time visitor versus a repeat visitor. That's the data that we have here. This is the overall experience rating question, which some of you might be familiar with. And you can see that there was some differences, particularly in the superior and excellent categories between ratings for first-time visitors and repeat visitors. I'm sorry, folks, again. So just in closing, I think the thing I want you guys to take away with as you think about analyzing and visualizing your data is just thinking about, are your data qualitative or quantitative? What do your data look like? What questions are you hoping to answer? And who do you want to make use of the data? Who are your stakeholders? And the answer to each of these questions will have an impact on the decisions that you make. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sheila.
About if I unmute. I'm Sheila Brommel from the Minnesota Historical Society. I'm going to talk about a process that we've learned from our friends at the science museums. We refer to it as TBI. That does not stand for traumatic brain injury. Instead, it stands for team-based inquiry. There was a network of science museums across the country who received a National Science Foundation grant to develop experiences related to nanoscience education. And towards the end of the grant, they knew that they needed to evaluate the results of their efforts, but didn't necessarily have professional evaluators at every site. So they developed a method to train non-professional evaluators. So anybody, any education staff or whoever could jump into doing evaluation. So team-based inquiry, then, it's an approach to empowering people to get the data they need when they need it in order to make improvements to their products and practices. And kind of the key elements, it is led by non-evaluation professionals. It's collaborative, it's team-based, small scale and very focused, embedded in your everyday work. And the biggest key is that it's systematic. There are 4 phases to TBI. Oops, let's go back one. So in phase 1, you're coming up with the question. What is it that you need to know the answer to in order to develop a successful educational experience? And then phase 2 is investigation. You know, how are you going to collect the information? Who are you going to collect it from? So phase 1 and 2, we do kind of together. And we actually go out and collect the data, but then we come back and we look at phase 3 and 4, which is reflection and improvement. We bring the team back together to discuss and analyze the data, identify kind of key findings and lessons learned, and then we move into an improvement phase, and that's actually to think about the changes that they can make based on what the data is telling them and coming up with a plan of action. So I'm going to show you the documents that we use so you can get a sense of what it looks like. We do paper dashboard reports where we are trying to really pare down the data in multiple graphs, but show them in a condensed version of a paper report so that theoretically they can zoom into the question that they want to know and see what those results are. We would give this report then to the team members so that they can look at it, come back, and then kind of the different pieces that we do in each of these phases. I ask them first, what findings from the report do you see that are particularly successful? And I do this because I think it's really important to celebrate the successes. What is it that's working? What do you want to do more of? But then we move into the flip side of that. What findings from the report do you see that may need improvement, or are there opportunities to make changes to do things a little differently? From there, we move into maybe my favorite part of the process, and it's really just a giant brainstorming. I ask what questions what actions, questions, changes, improvements could be made to the program to help maintain or improve some of these patterns. So really, I want them to think outside of the box. What could we be doing differently to make things better? And that usually generates a pretty long list. And knowing that we can't do everything, we then move into prioritizing by cost. And cost could be financial. It could be in terms of staff time, but then also to look at the impact. And then finally, we move to an action plan where we are taking the high impact, lowest cost ideas first, because that's the low-hanging fruit, try to figure out how we can address that. And kind of the big secret to an action plan is assigning a responsible person to follow up on that item and give a due date, come back as a team and meet to review your action plan, giving status updates. That's how you're going to ensure things are more likely to get done. Let's see. So I document the process in a Word document as the meeting is taking place. So I've pre-filled in the questions and, just bullet points of what is it that worked well, what is it that you maybe want to do differently. And initially, I would go in with a blank page and let the team come up with the items that were successful or needing improvement, because I didn't want to lead them down any particular path. But I have since found that it maybe helps if I pre-populate with a few things that caught my eye. It's a way to warm the team up and get them going, and that generates a lot of discussion. And they really do appreciate, I think, celebrating what is it that works, and they like seeing a long list of items. Let's see. Oops, I think I went Okay, so then the flip side, what is it that may need improvement? So just pulling out the data elements that are maybe not where you want them to be, or you think you can do better in that particular area. Then we move into brainstorming, and I really want them to think creatively, think outside the box. Don't censor yourself yet. Let's just throw it all out there. And then we'll figure out what's doable or what isn't. And you'll notice here that I've numbered all the items that they came up with, all the ideas, because then we move into prioritizing by impact and low cost. And this goes faster if I can just type in the number. So you can see high impact, low cost. That's a nice place to start, because these are the items that will give you the biggest change with the least amount of either financial or time efforts put into it. And that's not to say that you're not going to do the high impact, high cost items, but it means that maybe that takes a little bit more planning. Maybe the idea requires extra financial support, and you want to look at fundraising or grant writing to come up with the money to be able to implement that idea. If something is low impact, low cost, you might do it, but it's not going to be at the top of your list because it's not going to generate that much of an impact for you. And then the things that are a low impact, high cost, those are the things that you're probably not going to do because it's going to be very resource intensive and not make that much of a difference. So this is just a way to sort out that list of brainstorming ideas that the team had come up with. Then we turn it into an action plan where we take the idea, so number 2, looking into highway signs or lamppost signs. Okay, so what's the first step? What do we need to do? Somebody needs to call Ronnie. Who's going to call Ronnie? Krista will. When is she going to do that? October 31st. Then when we come back and review the action plan, and typically you could do that like in 30, 60, and 90 days, there's nothing that feels more rewarding than typing in the word done. It's like checking off that item on your list. That's kind of it in a nutshell for what the TBI process looks like. Because this was funded by the National Science Foundation, all the resources and materials are free and available for you. So go to their website, you can download, they have an actual handbook, they have templates for any of the forms or sheets to use. It's a fabulous resource, and you don't need to be a science museum to use it. You can adapt it to whatever your organization is. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right, cool. Making sure that means somebody heard me and I wasn't still on mute. My name is Marcus, as you can see in the slide, like right there. Marcus, and I'm the Vice President of Learning and Facilities here with Caladium in beautiful, rainy Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a recovering director of audience research and evaluation. Now, my colleagues have laid out some really terrific steps and tips that you can use, at the end, as they've mentioned, across museum disciplines for several different evaluation projects. But now that you've prepared all your dashboards and your reports and all of your tools to communicate the data that you've mined, what if that data is negative? Data always either supports or refutes predetermined thoughts, knowledge, and assumptions. But when the data is negative, the odds are that it's in the refutes column, and communicating that data can be contentious. Many are afraid of evaluation and are afraid even more of receiving negative evaluation results. Human beings are generally speaking, do not like receiving bad grades on anything. Organizations are naturally conservative. And you'll know if you're in one of those organizations if you've heard the phrase, "That's the way it's always been." Sometimes a negative evaluation can mean a threat to an existing power structure. You have someone that may claim that the data isn't as smart as me. I've been here for 20 years. I know what our guests want because I've been here forever and a day. Sure. And lastly, what I want you to think about is that we, and that means that all of us, the big we, take everything very personally. Generally speaking, we are personally invested and attached to our projects that are being evaluated. There's a perceived threat when someone is evaluating a program or an exhibit or a process. And sometimes that threat can lead to things such as, well, that person just doesn't like me or doesn't like my department or doesn't like my vice president or whoever. I could bore you with examples of times when I've had to share negative evaluation results, but the time that it would take to change the names of the innocent or of the museums that I've worked at, and several of you on this have known me in a lot of those museums, it would just take forever. So what I thought would be more effective would be use this time to consider specific working traits and tricks that will help you when delivering negative evaluation results. These 6 traits will lead you, yes, you, to be an evaluation superhero, capes not included. These 6 traits I will share with you are those that I'm thinking about when I'm preparing to deliver evaluation results, whether those results are positive or negative, in fact, especially if the results are negative. You can succeed at any one of these to deliver positive news, but for negative news, you really need to take a look at all 6 of these. These traits really help frame data and encourage the team, whoever that team may be, to make positive change in their program or their project. They can also set the tone for the project if you're thinking about doing front-end evaluation, and really help make everyone involved feel more comfortable and not feel the pinch of fear from evaluation. So, everyone should be adaptable, much like the Avengers Scarlet Witch. The Scarlet Witch is unafraid of new teams, new ideas, or new industries. She's unafraid to be challenged and to upend preconceived assumptions. She's secure in her emotions and doesn't see everything as a personal attack, a threat, or a challenge. She's creative and finds ways to solve challenges. She plans, yet responds to the ever-changing demands of the environment. Pictured with her, you also see the vision there in the green and yellow. The vision is collaborative. He's not always just working together, but adding value to any relationship or collaboration. The vision wants to work as a team from the beginning of the project and is always thinking win-win. The best part is that the vision suspends suspicion and always assumes best intentions and is service-minded with a focus on business results rather than personal or individual accolades. You should be like Nick Fury and be communicative. Nick stays connected with the entire team and communicates early and often with progress reports, preliminary findings, throughout various stages of a project. He knows his audience, knows the stakeholders' characteristics, how and when and why they like to communicate. Nick removes barriers to communication and communicates with various methods and addresses conflict immediately. Be enthusiastic like the Black Panther. The Black Panther reminds us that attitude is a choice. And many times your attitude will set the tone for an entire project. The Black Panther is cool, calm, collected, regal, and that sets the entire tone for Wakanda. Fictitious, yet very applicable. And we should all strive to be like Captain America. Captain America is mission conscious. All of our organizations have missions as a way to guide, as a compass to what we do. And Captain America understands that compass. He understands he knows where the team is, where the project is, and where the team and the project is headed. And with a leader like Captain America, it's very easy to get behind a common purpose. Be solution-oriented. Spider-Man knows that challenges are all temporary and objects will always be removed. If you've seen any of the Marvel films of Spider-Man, you know he will not give up easily. In fact, he's kind of a pest. But Spider-Man always strives to stretch and to learn new things and, again, really be a part of the solution no matter what the challenges are that lay ahead. So thank you for hanging out with my little love letter to the Marvel Universe. And I want to leave you with this. It is just as important, if not more important, to effectively communicate opportunistic evaluation results. Keeping these tips in mind will help you throughout all of your careers in all of your organizations. Thank you. If you need more from me specifically, all my contact information is below, or if your screen's oriented that way, it's over there. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to all our presenters. I'm going to read through a few of the questions and pose them to each of you individually, if that's all right. So starting with a question from Sarah. Liz, were those 3 facilitation strategies based in other research or literature about facilitation?
So the different facilitation strategies that I showed you all, we had conversations with the educators who were a part of our project, who were doing a lot of the facilitation, to get some ideas from them. And then we did go back and look at the literature and try to figure out how to kind of fit our project in within that. The group that we ended up finding that we kind of fit in with the best was some facilitation information from the Tinkering Studio out of Exploratorium. So we couldn't exactly use the scheme they had, since those were maker activities and ours were, inquiry-based hands-on activities. But our 3 categories are pretty close to theirs.
Excellent. So the next one, again from different Sarah, how did you create the teardrop data visualization of the facilitator phrases?
So I think you all mean the crazy visual I showed you with the different columns.
Yeah, that one's really
yeah, so that's really just an Excel sheet, and each row is a different column. I mean, each column is a different column in an Excel sheet. Each row is a different utterance, and then we just put colors in each of those to represent the different utterances that happen throughout an interaction with one of the activities. So that one was pretty, it's time consuming, but something that probably any of us could make.
I was gonna say clever and also cost effective. I like that. Okay, Sheila, from Sarah again. What are some of the habits and infrastructures you've established to help hold space for team-based inquiry and make it a standard part of your processes?
That's a really good question. I think one thing we do is we're trying to make it go along with the evaluation process and the survey process. So if a team or a department comes to us and says, we need to do a survey on this, that's great. We can help them, take a step back, figure out your questions. How are we going to get this information? And then once they have the data, we just kind of assume that they will have this TBI session. And it is about a 2-hour session, but we try to make it an automatic part of the process. So it's not even up for debate or it's not up for negotiation. This is just what you do once you have the data. And sometimes when people are skeptical or hesitant about one more process, I'll sneak up on them and hold a meeting, but I may not call it a TBI meeting. I may refer to it as, let's look at the data together. Okay, now what are we going to do about it? I try to make sure that they see that there's a benefit to them in doing this. They're going to get something out of it. I also try to make it fun. I use humor. I try to make it not feel so much like work.
Excellent. And you've kind of answered the second question from Kelly, which is what strategies have you used to cultivate a culture of evaluation among non-evaluators, and how have you helped to create buy-in? And this might be a question for all 4 of you.
Yeah, and again, we're still in the process of creating a culture of evaluation. I think it's a never-ending step to continuously get better at it. But like I said, if we can articulate the benefit to them, what they're going to get out of it, and try to make it fun and easy and not seem so much like work.
Anybody else? Chime in? All right, I'll move on to the next one. From Kiku, what roles at your museums are in charge of holding staff accountable for doing this kind of work?
Okay, well, here at the Historical Society, we have 2 evaluators, and we view our roles as more of a support or a service role to these teams. We're here to help you get what you need. They do have supervisors and managers who, we also try to show the value of evaluation, and technically it would be up to them to hold staff accountable for doing this kind of work.
What about you guys?
This is Liz. We have a research and evaluation department that we've had for a number of years. I think it's become part of, as Sheila was saying, as you guys were asking earlier, it's kind of become a part of our organization. In particular, departments, especially that they want data. It helps them. They can make changes, figure out how to improve things. And that's kind of really helped to build that buy-in and make them want it, as opposed to feel that it's something that they have to do. There are certainly some cases in which we get grant funding from like federal agencies when there is an obligation to do evaluation, but I would say in general, people are coming to us because they want to do evaluation and have data and make decisions based on that data.
And I would add to that, sometimes if people aren't used to working with data, it can be intimidating. We have those summer dashboard reports that show a lot of numbers all at once, and it can be hard for somebody to make sense of it if they're not used to it or haven't done it very much before. So I think people do see us as a support because we can help them learn how to read that data and interpret that data and take meaning away from it.
Another question for Sheila from Sarah. How long does a full TBI process usually take for your team, and how many of these projects per year do you tackle in this way?
Yeah. So like I said, it's a 4-stage process, and we break it into 2 and 2. And so the first stage for coming up with the question and how we're going to collect the information, that's usually about a 2-hour meeting. But again, it depends on how large the team is, how talkative or philosophical they like to be. Sometimes we run over, sometimes it could be a little bit less. Then once we have the data and come back to reflect and approve on it, that's also typically a 2-hour meeting, give or take, depending on the size of the team. How many we do a year? So we're a pretty large organization. The Minnesota Historical Society has a network of 23 sites across the state. I would say it's 14 of our sites that we actively do evaluation with. And we will do it from everything from our general visitor experiences to our school programs to special unique programs. I don't know, maybe 30 to 40 TBIs a year.
Excellent. And last one for Sheila. What allies or leaders in your organization helped establish that automatic TBI is a norm? And that's from Sarah.
It may be the two evaluators probably are the first line of making it automatic, and it's just the way that we approach the teams that, you know, first we figure out your questions, then we design the survey, then we collect the data, then we come back and have a TBI. So it's just kind of standardized as part of the process. But again, the supervisors, the managers, the division leaders have all participated in a TBI, so they see the benefit, and we include them in the TBI, and it just becomes kind of a matter of expectation, I think.
Excellent. And I know that this will be posted on AAM's YouTube site, and I think that a downloadable copy could be available upon request if there are no copyright issues. So I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I'm sure that Sarah can get back to you on that. Yeah, excellent. Well, thanks so much for being here today. Liz, do you want to close things out?
Sure, yeah, let me just echo what Erica said. Thank you all for coming. If you have any other questions, I think the speakers, we can stay on a few more minutes. Otherwise, everyone is free to leave. As Erica said, you know, because this was recorded, we're hoping we will be posting this up on the AAM YouTube channel soon. We're also going to be starting up a series of blog posts and a quick discussion of this therapy that you were all at will be our first blog post that we do. So thank you all again, and look out for information from us about upcoming therapies and when this is posted on the YouTube channel.
All right, and if there are any other follow-up questions, we can kind of hang out.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. If I can sneak in a question, I'd love to. My name's Jessica. I work at Science World in British Columbia. And I'd love to hear a little bit more from Sheila about when might TBI be too much? Like I imagine that you can't do this for every single request. Are there times when you think that it's not necessary, or times that you think that it is definitely necessary?
I think that if you're going to go through the trouble of collecting data, then you should be in a position to want to take action on the data. This is what gets us to data-informed decision-making. And, you know, the formal process might at times be too much if it's a smaller team, although I've done TBIs with 2 additional people, you know, so very small teams. But I maybe don't refer to the specific steps. This is what I talked about when I'll kind of sneak up on them, and I don't use the evaluation language. I don't call it TBI, but we may have the report in front of us and we're looking through it together, and I might highlight, oh, look at this, isn't this number, you know, you have a high net promoter score, and look at this overall experience rating, this is fabulous. And, oh, what about this number? It looks lower this year, or maybe this isn't as high as you want it to. So I just kind of ask questions that gets them thinking and gets them to come up with ideas of what they might want to do differently. So it's maybe just, I think it's always important to use the data that you have collected, but how formal of a process really depends on the group. If they're new to evaluation, if they're afraid of evaluation, I'll have a gentler approach. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Thanks. It's been, I think that I struggle, I'm the only evaluator at my institution, and I don't want to have a sort of policing role. I don't want to tell people they can't do evaluation.
Right.
But I also don't want them to waste their time or waste our participants' time and not use the data, right?
Exactly.
Oh,
Yes,
thanks.
Jessica, even at the Museum of Science, we use TBI sometimes, particularly if it's a question that's very specific to a team and it's a small question, and we can kind of, sometimes it makes more sense to kind of help guide them to do the evaluation on their own instead of doing a big project. So we'll kind of gauge, the needs of the team and decide based on that.
Right. Yeah, I guess that can help scale down if they realize that they have to do it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks everyone so much. This was super helpful.